The morning was still, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until even the smallest sound seems amplified. The sun had barely crested the horizon, spilling pale gold across the rolling fields, and a thin layer of mist clung to the grass like a fragile veil. The farmer moved down the dirt path toward the barn, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil with each step. Normally, this walk brought comfort, a sense of order in a life shaped by routine, but today, the air felt different, charged in a way he couldn't place. His routine was simple: feed the chickens, check the fences, inspect the fields for signs of trouble. He liked it that way. The farm demanded nothing but attention, and in return, it offered a quiet stability. But stability felt fragile this morning. Even the birds seemed hesitant, their songs slower, broken by long, uneasy pauses. The farmer's gaze drifted to the far edge of the field, where the tall grass rippled gently. Something, or maybe nothing, shifted just beyond his line of sight. He blinked, convinced it was a trick of the morning light. Yet the feeling persisted, a prickle of tension crawling across his skin. For the first time in years, the farm felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage set for something unseen. The quiet was not peaceful, it was waiting. He paused, hand resting on the barn door, heart quickening, aware of a presence he could not yet identify. Whatever it was, it would not stay hidden for long. And deep down, he knew this morning would mark the beginning of something he had never anticipated. As he moved closer to the edge of the field, the farmer's eyes caught a subtle movement, a shadow among the tall morning grass. At first, he thought it was a deer or perhaps one of the stray dogs that sometimes wandered onto his land. But the shape stayed still, almost unnervingly so, and there was a quietness about it that didn't belong to any animal he knew. Then he saw the eyes. Dark, wide, and unblinking, staring straight at him from just beyond the fence line. The farmer froze. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to those two small, cautious orbs. There was something in the gaze that was almost human, a quiet intelligence, a hesitancy, and yet a demand he couldn't ignore. The figure slowly emerged from the mist. It was a young horse, its coat dull from dust and dew, thin ribs showing faintly beneath its flanks. The foal's legs trembled slightly, and a small scar ran along one of its shoulders, pale against its dark fur. It didn't flinch when he stepped closer. Instead, it tilted its head as if studying him, weighing whether he was friend or foe. The farmer's heart tightened. He had seen wild horses before, but never one that approached with such measured curiosity. Normally, they would bolt at the first sign of humans. This one was different. Something about it, its patient stillness, the subtle quiver of its ears, made him uneasy, yet drawn in at the same time. He took a cautious step forward, his voice low, soft. "Hey there!" The foal's ears flicked toward him, but it didn't run. It only watched, its gaze steady, unyielding, almost pleading. For reasons he couldn't explain, the farmer felt a flicker of recognition, as if the horse had come with a purpose, not just by accident. A cold wind swept through the field, carrying the faint smell of earth and wet grass. The foal shifted slightly, stepping closer to the fence, then stopped abruptly, ears pricked, head turning toward the distant hills. The farmer followed its gaze and felt a twinge of unease. Something was out there, something the horse was trying to tell him. And somehow, he knew he would not be able to leave the field without understanding it. The farmer turned back toward the barn, thinking the foal would finally retreat into the tall grass. He had expected it to vanish like any other wild horse, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But when he glanced over his shoulder, his heart skipped a beat. The foal was still there, watching him intently, then taking a hesitant step forward, mirroring his movements. At first, he shook his head. "Go on now, you don't belong here," he murmured, waving his hand. The foal froze for a moment, ears flicking sideways, then continued to follow him at a careful distance. Its small hooves made almost no sound against the soft dirt, and yet every step it took felt deliberate, almost purposeful. The farmer quickened his pace, hoping the creature would lose interest. But when he reached the edge of the barnyard, the foal was right there again, a few yards behind, eyes tracking his every move. There was a stubbornness in its posture, a refusal to be shaken off, that unsettled him more than any predator ever could. He had lived on this land for decades, and in all that time, he had never seen an animal behave like this. By mid-morning, the foal had fully committed to following him. It wasn't playful or curious, it was patient, almost mournful in its persistence. Each time he tried to distract it with the chickens or a bucket of water, it ignored them, following his shadow instead. Even when the wind blew fiercely, carrying scents that might have attracted or distracted any other horse, the foal stayed. The farmer stopped by the fence, rubbing his face with both hands. He had questions but no answers. Why was it following him? What had driven it from the wild, beyond the safety of its herd? And, most hauntingly, why did it seem to know that he could somehow help? A sudden whinny pierced the morning air, soft and trembling, yet full of urgency. The farmer's heart clenched. The foal wasn't just following him out of curiosity. It was searching for something, calling silently for aid, and somehow he was the one it had chosen. A chill ran down his spine, and he knew, with a certainty that left him uneasy, that today was going to be unlike any other day on the farm. By late morning, the farmer noticed that the foal's behavior was changing, and not in ways he expected. It no longer followed him casually. Now, every movement seemed deliberate, urgent. The young horse would pause, sniffing the air, ears swiveling toward distant sounds beyond the farm. Its eyes, dark and wide, seemed to search for something unseen, something the farmer could not yet perceive. The foal had grown thinner since the first glance at the fence. Its coat, dusty and matted, offered no warmth against the morning chill, and its small legs trembled when it took a step. The farmer's chest tightened. He had seen wild horses stumble before, but never with this kind of desperation, never with such a strange awareness of a human presence. It wasn't just following him now, it was leading him. Every few moments, the foal would stop, turn its head toward the distant hills, and whinny softly, a sound that was almost a plea. The farmer could feel the urgency in it, something primal and raw, the kind of instinct that could not be ignored. He knelt to catch a closer look at its hooves, noticing scuffs and small cuts that suggested it had been running, possibly escaping some danger, for hours or even days. The sense of unease settled into the farmer's bones. He had lived his life among animals, understood their moods, their needs, their fears, but this was different. There was intelligence here, and there was pain. Something had driven this foal away from its herd, away from the mother it should have depended on. And the way it looked at him, eyes locking onto his, suggested it believed he could help, that he had to. The wind shifted, rustling the grass in long, sharp whispers. The foal pawed at the dirt, head lowering, body tense. The sound of distant crows seemed louder than usual, piercing the morning's fragile quiet. The farmer swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. The foal wasn't just lost. It was pleading silently, desperately for him to understand. For the first time, he realized the gravity of what he faced. This was no ordinary encounter. The horse wasn't curious. It wasn't mischievous, it was in trouble. And somehow, he was the one it had chosen to help. The thought sank into him, heavy and unstoppable. Today would not be like any other day. The farmer took a deep breath, telling himself he needed to finish his morning chores. He couldn't afford to get distracted by a lone foal. With measured steps, he began to walk toward the barn, hoping that the young horse would lose interest and wander off. After all, wild horses didn't follow humans, at least, not like this. But when he glanced back over his shoulder, his heart sank. The foal was still there, following him with careful, almost hesitant steps. It didn't run, didn't panic, but its eyes held something he couldn't ignore: trust, desperation, and a silent plea. Each time he tried to quicken his pace, it mirrored him, closing the distance just enough to make him feel its presence without fear. The farmer stopped, rubbing the back of his neck. "Go on now," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to the animal. The foal tilted its head, ears flicking, and let out a soft whinny, almost as if scolding him for not understanding. A chill ran down his spine. For a moment, he considered leaving the field entirely, returning later when the animal had vanished. But the look in the foal's eyes, the quiet insistence, the sense of urgency, made him pause. This was not curiosity. This was need. And somehow, he knew it had chosen him. He stopped completely, breathing slowly, heart racing. The morning sun fell across the field in long golden stripes, and the foal remained just beyond reach, waiting. For the first time, the farmer understood that walking away was no longer an option. The day had already shifted. Something important was about to unfold, and he was already caught in its path. The farmer hesitated for only a moment before deciding to follow the foal. It led him away from the familiar fields and into rougher terrain, where the grass grew taller and the ground became uneven. Each step was cautious, both for him and for the fragile young horse, whose legs trembled under its small frame. The foal paused often, sniffing the air and glancing back to make sure he was still following. The farmer noticed every scar, every subtle limp, and felt a growing sense of responsibility tighten in his chest. He had thought of wild horses as untouchable, free spirits, but this one seemed to need him, and he could not ignore the silent call in its eyes. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees lining the hillside, carrying distant sounds he couldn't identify. With each step deeper into the hills, the foal's urgency grew. Its soft whinnies echoed across the landscape, a language of need that he could barely understand yet somehow felt in his bones. For the first time in years, the farmer felt the weight of another life pressing upon him. This was more than a chance encounter. The foal was leading him somewhere, and he knew instinctively that the journey would change both of them forever. The foal led him through a narrow path flanked by thick underbrush, the sun now high enough to cast sharp, dappled shadows across the uneven ground. Each step was cautious, careful, as if the young horse knew the terrain better than he did. The air smelled of damp earth and leaves, carrying a quiet tension that made the farmer's heart pound. Then the trees parted, revealing a small clearing hidden from the rest of the farm. And there she was, his breath caught in his chest. A larger horse lay on the ground, her flank heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. Her coat was streaked with mud and blood, her eyes half closed but alert, watching the foal that had run so far to reach him. The young horse nudged her gently, whinnying softly as if urging her to rise. The sight of them together, the mother and her desperate child, pierced the farmer's chest. He dropped to his knees, overcome with a mixture of sorrow and awe. The foal had not wandered aimlessly. It had searched tirelessly, guided by instinct, and it had found him. He reached out slowly, voice trembling. "I'll help. I promise." And for the first time that morning, the quiet of the farm felt heavy with purpose, as though the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The farmer sank to his knees beside the injured mother horse, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. Her breaths were shallow and ragged, each one sounding like a whisper of struggle. The foal pressed close, nuzzling her neck and letting out soft, urgent whinnies that seemed to plead with him. The sight was unbearable, the helplessness in those dark eyes, the silent call for aid that only he could answer. He ran his hands over her sides, feeling the tense muscles and shallow rib cage beneath his palms. The cuts on her flank were fresh, small streams of blood mingling with the mud that clung to her coat. He had seen injuries before, even in wildlife, but never like this. Never with such raw vulnerability. Tears blurred his vision. He had thought he was prepared for hard work, for long days and lonely nights, but he hadn't expected to feel such a crushing weight of responsibility in a single moment. The foal pressed its head against his shoulder, and he could feel the trust radiating from its tiny body, fragile but unwavering. "Hold on," he whispered, voice catching. "I'm here. I'll get you through this." The wind moved through the clearing, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass, and for a moment, everything else, the quiet farm, the distant hills, even the sun above, vanished. There was only this, a mother fighting for her life, a child relying on him, and the undeniable truth that some moments in life demanded more than preparation, more than strength. They demanded surrender to compassion, raw and unguarded. And in that moment, the farmer broke. By mid-afternoon, the farmer realized he couldn't manage this alone. He ran back toward the farm, calling the local wildlife rescue, his mind racing with worry. The foal stayed close, eyes never leaving him, moving with a careful, urgent pace that mirrored his own anxiety. Every moment felt stretched, the weight of responsibility pressing harder with each step. When the rescue team arrived, the clearing was tense with quiet anticipation. The professionals moved quickly but gently, assessing the mother horse first. They murmured instructions to the farmer, guiding him to keep the foal calm. He knelt beside the young horse, stroking its dusty coat, feeling its tiny body shake with nervous energy. The bond he had sensed all morning was undeniable, and the thought of separating them filled him with dread. The mother horse was loaded carefully into a trailer, and the foal watched, whinnying softly, its head lowered. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if the world had stopped. The farmer felt tears prick his eyes again, not just for the struggle they had endured, but for the fleeting, fragile nature of trust and life itself. When the foal was finally led toward the trailer, it hesitated, looking back at the farmer one last time, as if silently thanking him. The team assured him it would be safe, that both mother and child would recover. Relief washed over him, but it was mingled with a bittersweet ache. He had been part of something larger than himself, and the memory would linger far longer than the morning sun. The clearing emptied slowly, leaving only the farmer, the soft rustle of leaves, and a sense of quiet that was heavier now, filled with gratitude, sorrow, and the weight of a day that had changed everything. Days passed, and the farm felt different. The early morning quiet remained, but it was no longer the same calm that had greeted the farmer for decades. Now, the silence carried memory of the foal's wide, trusting eyes, the desperate whinnies, the fragile mother struggling to survive. It was a silence heavy with lessons he could not unlearn. He found himself walking the fields more slowly, noticing small details, the way the wind bent the grass, the patterns of bird flight, the faint tracks of deer and rabbits. He had always worked alongside nature, but now he felt it watching him in return, acknowledging him, reminding him that he was part of a larger rhythm of life, one that demanded attention, empathy, and care. The foal and its mother had recovered under the rescue team's watchful care. Though he no longer saw them every day, the farmer thought of them constantly. A small piece of him had gone with that young horse into the hills, a piece that made him softer, more patient, and more aware of the quiet needs of the world around him. Even chores that had once felt monotonous now carried weight. Feeding the chickens, mending fences, tending the fields, they were acts of connection, small but meaningful. He spoke to the land, to the animals, to the wind itself, knowing it would listen. The morning sun rose again, casting gold across the fields, but now he walked among it with new eyes. He understood that life's true lessons often arrive quietly, without fanfare, through the eyes of the vulnerable and the trusting. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his chest, that the foal had chosen him not by accident, but to remind him of something essential: compassion, attention, and the courage to care for what cannot speak. The farm remained, unchanged to the casual observer, but he had changed, and that was enough.